Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And what we're going to be talking about now is interviewing um, and trying to get a job. And so now that you've put together a great resume and a great cover letter, you got to, the interview. What do you do in the interview itself? Well, there's a lot of things to do, and there's a lot of things not to do in an interview, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So let me share my screen with you. And we're going to talk about interviews. And this is, most of the stuff is really all about what you would do in any interview in the hospitality industry or whatever industry you happen to be going into. Let's talk about getting an interview itself. And how do you get an interview? Well, keep in mind, we talked about this before when we talked about resumes and cover letters. Your cover letter and resume is more than likely the first way that you are going to get the interview. And then, of course, you have to think about where do you look for those sources. Well, I mentioned some of them here, certainly on the internet today. Back when I was a kid, we didn't have the internet, so it was in the newspaper. But there's a ton of different links out there. Again, all you have to do is do a Google search. But here are some of the main places: Indeed, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Monster, and then there's many sites that specialize very specifically in certain industries. So I think those lists are absolutely endless out there, and you need to do some research when it comes to the job that you are looking for. In this industry. Again, they're not all going to be listed on Monster. You need to be aware of that. Local newspaper, that may or may not work. Many newspaper companies today have an online version of that, though, and you may be able to find some positions in the quote newspaper. Networking. Wow, this is a big one. Most of you watching this are pretty young and haven't really done what we consider networking out there in the real world. But once you get into an assistant manager position and management positions, you should be a part of associations. So let's say you're a front office manager. There's an association for front office managers where you get together and you talk to other front office managers at other hotels, or maybe you're part of the local state's hotel association. That's not just being a member on paper. What you want to do is to become as involved as you possibly can in those networking type groups, or networking when it comes to other civic type of events or dinners or receptions, where there's going to be other business people there that are a part of an industry that you want to go into, if it's hospitality, whatever it is. Networking, who are the people that you know? And the chances are always really good where your next job really is going to be coming from, a good job as you work your way up the ladder. And the higher you go up that ladder, no matter what industry, it's who you know. And it's your networking. And you want to be very well aware of that. And you want to, as much as possible, not to burn bridges, and think of everybody around you in the business world as somebody who might be hiring you in the future. You just do not know. That's easier said than done, but you want to do that as much as you possibly can. Networking is incredibly important. I did a tremendous amount of networking over the many years that I've been working. And as an educator in Denver, for example, I was very tied in with the community, with the things that I was doing. I knew the governor, I knew the mayor of Denver. I was very high profile, and again, all was networking. And so you want to do that as much as you possibly can in your future, and do more networking as you move along in your careers. Anyway, go on with interviewing. Social media, you're going to get, or you may get job leads working your way up in a current company, which is awesome. It was many years ago, you of course, that you stayed, not even in my lifetime really, you stayed for 40 years and then you retired at the same company. That doesn't, that rarely happens today, that's for sure. We move around and that's an appropriate thing. So you got the interview. What do you need to do to get ready for your interview? The number one thing is research the company. It is amazing how many people do not research the company or the organization that they're going to be interviewing with. And it's in today's world, it's so incredibly easy. As you all know, all you have to do is Google a company and you're going to get 100 hits or 1,000 hits, depending upon how big it is. You need to look at the company's main page. You need to get to the feel for the company. What is their mission? What are they trying to do? If it's a hotel company like Ritz-Carlton, for example, you better know that Marriott owns Ritz-Carlton. You better know that. Because if you don't and you get in an interview and you're asked about it, you're going to look like an idiot. I hate to tell you, and I hate to be that frank, but you're not going to get the job probably. You want to know as much as you possibly can. Anytime that you're going to be doing an interview where you really want the job, my advice is that you do a minimum of 2 to 4 hours of research on that particular company, as well as researching the person who you are going to be interviewing with or persons. You may not always be able to find that information out, but you certainly want to ask if it is possible. Most of the time, you're going to be able to find out who it is. And look at their LinkedIn. Find out what college they went to. Find out where they've come from. What other companies have they worked for? Now, you don't want to, in the interview, just regurgitate that information. You don't want to just throw it at the people that you're interviewing with. But when it's appropriate to slide that into the conversation, if I'm the one interviewing you, I'm going to be thinking, wow, I'm really impressed. I can tell that they did their homework. You don't need to tell me as the interviewer or the recruiter or the HR position or person that you actually did your homework. I can tell you did your homework, and I'm going to be impressed with that. That right there is going to put you in the top 20% of the people, because the other 80 to 70 to 80% of the people aren't going to bother researching the company and doing their homework, because a lot of people, just to be perfectly frank, are lazy. The people that are going to be hiring you, hopefully the company that's going to be hiring you is a company that only wants the best. And I've said this to you before, I'm assuming you don't want to be mediocre. So make sure you do your homework. So let's talk about the interview itself. You need to think about, before you get into that interview, what are you going to wear? If you've done your homework and you found out that this company is pretty casual, and I'm going to make this up, but you're going to go applying at Google or one of the tech companies. That's not hospitality, but I'm just using this as an example. But the chances of them being pretty casual are going to be pretty good. So what I would do is I wouldn't dress up to the point where you look like you're going to go to the prom or you're going to a funeral. I would not wear jeans. I would not dress like they're going to be dressed. You want to dress above where they're dressing is what I would recommend to you. I probably would not, if I wore, I would wear a jacket, depending upon the position. You know, if it's an hourly position, it's going to be different than a management position. If it's a management position, I'm going to wear a jacket. I may not wear a tie, because I don't want to seem like I'm too stuffy. And because they may look at me and think, really, you're applying at Google and you're wearing a tie? So you need to think about that. I'm not telling you what to do here. I'm telling you to think about what company you're going into after you've done your research. And that's really important as far as what you're wearing. You want to wear something relatively conservative. You don't want to wear anything that's crazy. In the hospitality industry, most companies are relatively conservative. Even 10 years ago, even 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I would have told you they're conservative. Hotel companies, for example, are conservative. They're less conservative today. For example, at Four Seasons, managers don't wear ties anymore. At a Renaissance, Marriott, managers don't wear ties anymore. That's a company policy. Managers are not supposed to wear ties. In other words, that you want to know those kinds of things, and you want to reflect that in your what you wear to that company. Just think about it. Do your homework. Practice what you're going to say. This may feel really strange, but sit in a room. I'm right now, nobody's home. I'm doing videos when nobody's home. I don't want anybody listening in the background when I say and things like that, because it makes me self-conscious. But when I'm alone and doing this, I feel more comfortable. Sit in a room and just talk out loud. Here's a great one, and this is so easy to do. Use Zoom or Skype and tape yourself just like I'm doing right now. Most of you know how to do that. And watch yourself. The more you practice, the better you're going to be when it comes to sitting in an interview. Make mistakes when you are doing this and practicing, and stop and think, boy, I sure don't want to talk about that, or oh boy, you know, I really don't want to forget about talking about this. So maybe I'll just jot that down in my notebook so I make sure that I remember to talk about it at some point in the interview. So those are really important. What do you want to say? Make sure that you, and having a few notes there. I recommend taking a portfolio booklet. What all that is a book that has paper in it. And jotting a few notes down, type it out, or put it on your computer and print it out. Don't have a bunch of notes because you're going to get lost in those notes, but have a few words. Even what you're looking at right now on my PowerPoint, there's not a whole bunch of words there, and I'm talking for a long time. You should be able to do the same thing as well. Put a couple words of things that you want to talk about at some point in the interview. At the end, you may find that, oh, you know, I really don't want to talk about that. That's okay. At least you've written it down, and you've given yourself the opportunity to talk about it if you want to. What questions should you ask? This is a big one. When I was interviewing people, it was simple. If I got to the end of the interview, the question I'm always going to ask is, what questions do you have for me? And if the person said, I don't have any questions, usually I wasn't going to hire that person. That means that they think they know everything, or they really just are not interested, or they think I want questions. Now you need to be careful on those questions. So what should you do? Prep when you are getting ready for that interview days in advance. You want to keep that piece of paper with you, or your computer open, or whatever it is, and keep taking notes and keep writing questions down. Yes, some of your questions are going to be answered during the interview, but you want to have a couple questions at the end. Recruiters and HR people and people that are going to be hiring you, they want you to be asking questions. They want to know what you're curious about. Super important stuff. I mentioned this before. Make sure you have a hard copy of the resume when you go into that interview, just in case that person forgot it, or they need an extra copy, whatever it is. You want to make sure that you look prepared, and you are prepared. Here's the other one, is have a hard copy of your references. We talked about this in the resume segment, but you want to make sure that you have that hard copy there. You may not be giving it to them during that time, and that's just fine, but at least you are prepared, and if they were to ask for it, you can give it to them. Here's a big one. Shut your phone off. May sound simple, but man, you'd be amazed at how many people don't shut their phone off. Literally, physically shut it off. Nobody can get a hold of you during that time. That's a good thing. You know what I mean. First impressions. That's one of those impressions when the phone. So you're sitting in the waiting area, waiting for this person to come out. The person comes out. You need, this is their first impression of you physically, and meeting you in person. You obviously want to shake their hand, and boy, is that important. You don't want to shake their hand like a limp wrist. That right there is a turnoff, and it says, I'm not confident You don't want to hire me. At the same time, you don't want to be like some people and grab their hand and pull and grab it so hard that you nearly break their fingers. You don't want to do that either. How I do it, and I've been doing this a long time, because sometimes you know how when you go in to shake somebody's hand and you miss, or they miss, and it's really awkward. What I do is I literally look down real quick to see where my hand is going in, and I shake their hand firmly. If for some reason you do get where it's weird and that your hands don't end up where you should be shaking and it's awkward, simply make a joke of it and say, hey, let's do that again, and shake hands again, make fun of it. Very important. It says I'm confident in who I am. I'm confident in saying it's okay that our hands didn't go together right, or whatever that is. You want to make sure that you come off as being very confident. As you walk back to their office or wherever you're going to be interviewing, or let's say that you are interviewing at a Starbucks. I'm in a Starbucks all the time and I see people being interviewed, and that's a very appropriate thing to do, by the way, because you're in public. You're not behind closed doors with one other person, which is a whole another segment. It is extremely appropriate. In fact, it is almost a requirement that you have a little bit of small talk. Now, here's an example. If I were going back to somebody's office and they had in their office, they had little toy motorcycles, and it was Harley. Well, I'm a Harley guy, and would I mention that? Oh, you're darn right, because right there you have a bonding, a time where, wow, we have something in common, and that's a really big deal. And so I would bring up that, I rode Harleys for many years, and to talk about it a little bit and to let them then share, because chances are really good you've gotten them really excited that you're the same. And so it doesn't matter if it's motorcycles or if it's football or if it's whatever, you have a picture of your daughter or they have a picture of their daughter in ballet all over their office, and your daughter's in ballet or something like that. Those are really appropriate things to do and to talk about. You don't always want to have to talk about the weather, because that's kind of boring. Hopefully that there's something that you're going to be able to talk about, small talk. And then that leads into the interview itself. Backing up a little bit, I guess I should have had this before, is obviously you want to be on time. You don't want to show up an hour early. Now, I'm going to tell you what I do anytime that I interview. I'm going to do what I call a dry run. If you watch Seinfeld, you'll know, or actually no, Will and Grace. That comes from Will and Grace. I do a dry run. What that is I'm going to physically, how I'm going to get there that days before the interview. If I'm going to take a subway, if I'm going to drive, if I'm going to walk, or whatever it is, I'm going to take and drive that to make sure I know exactly where it is. You might already know where it is, and then you don't need to do this. But a lot of times you don't. If it's in an office building in Timbuktu in the suburbs or something, and you live downtown, you're going to want to make sure you know what the traffic is like. So what I do is I do that dry run, and I just make sure that I know where the building is, and I feel comfortable. It makes me feel more comfortable. It makes me feel like I can sleep the night before the actual interview itself. Then what am I going to do is I'm going to make sure that I show up at that office building at least an hour before the interview itself. Now, I'm going to make darn sure that I'm not seen. I'm not going to go into the lobby an hour early. And even in the parking lot, I'm going to make sure that nobody really sees me. I'll park way off in the distance or something. But I want to make darn sure I don't get caught in a traffic jam, because if there is one, you might be late. There's not an excuse to be late, period. There really is not. If you really want this job, you better make darn sure that you're on time. And so then I would walk in. This is what I would do. I'd walk in at least 10 minutes early into the reception area, if that's how it's set up, for that interview. And so really important stuff. Small talk, we already talked about that. How long does it that take for somebody to decide to hire you? I can tell you that most of the time when I was hiring people, I knew within usually 2 to 5 minutes. I could pretty much 80% of the time I could tell if I was going to hire you or not. Now, every once in a while, I would think to myself, man, I want to hire this person. And they talk themselves right out of the interview because they never stop talking. They never realize when the interview, I'm trying to close it, and they just keep talking. And then they tell me about things that are not appropriate, or tell me about things that are weird, or they talk about how they hate their last boss and things like that. And they talk themselves right out of the interview. That happens as well. Be very conscious of that. Don't talk yourself right out of the interview. That's what I just said. What questions should you ask? You want to ask questions that are appropriate to where they know you're interested in the position and you're interested in the company. Now, you may ask a question about the company, but you may start it out by saying, now, after a few hours of research, I've thoroughly researched your company, but there is a question that I do have about your company that wasn't mentioned in any of the research that I could find. Can you answer this question? Something like that. And they're going to, again, be impressed that you did research, number one, and number two, that you're actually interested in the company itself and the position itself. What questions should you not ask? There's a whole bunch of those. You don't want to ask questions that are usually about compensation, and I mentioned that coming up. I would not. I'm going to back up to more questions that you would ask. And this is something to keep in mind that a lot of folks don't remember, is that this is a two-way street. Yes, you're trying to get a job, but they're also trying to hire the best. And if you, in fact, are one of those people that are the best, you want to make sure you're getting the place that's going to be the best for you too, right? Don't you want to work for the best companies? And so to be asking questions of the interviewer, if that's the person who's going to be your boss, things like, what kind of leadership style do you have? How do you think employees should be treated in certain situations? That type of stuff. Questions that are going to be asked of you is, one of them almost always is, tell me about yourself. Well, you better think about what your answer is going to be. You don't want to start out by saying, well, I was born in Fargo, North Dakota 54 years ago, and that kind of thing. You want to make sure that you have thought about it and practice. Like I said, some of those interview questions are pretty standard, and they work. That's why they're standard, because people mess up on them because they don't think about them. Don't try to memorize your answers. That's a horrible thing to do, because then you're going to really get flubbed up, because we all get nervous in interviews, no matter who you are. But you want to have a really good idea about what you're going to be saying. Be aware of your nonverbal communication. This is huge. If you're sitting back and laying back kind of in the chair, and let's say that you're sitting in front of this person's desk, and they're sitting on the edge of their chair, well, they're going to first think that you're really way too laid back. You can tell a lot by body language. About 80 to 90% of our communication when face-to-face with somebody is in fact nonverbal communication. So this is a huge one. If the person, it seems like they're uptight, you don't want to change yourself, if you will, but you certainly want to be aware you're not being too relaxed, because if this person's a little uptight and you really want this job, you might want to at least sit in a very proper type of way, and you're straight up and so on. You know what I'm talking about. Be aware of your nonverbal communication. This is huge stuff. Go to YouTube and bring up some videos on nonverbal communication. You can't watch enough of these videos about things that you should be aware of. Your facial things, like how my eyebrows go like that, I know that. Or when I look like this, I know I can be intimidating. You want to be aware of your nonverbal communication, how you're sitting, all those things. So be very, very, very aware of that. Interview the interview with the organizations you don't. This is practicing. My recommendation, especially if you're young, you haven't interviewed a lot, try to get interviews and throw resumes out there with companies that you don't plan on working with at all. Now, what do I mean by that? What you want to do is just go out and interview. You don't want to tell the person you're interviewing with, hey, by the way, I'm not going to work for you, and I'm completely wasting your time. I'm just practicing. You certainly don't want to do that. But that's what I used to do when I was young, and I did it up until I was probably 35, and I did it quite often. I'd go out there and I'd interview because you can make your mistakes in interviews that don't matter to you, and it doesn't make any difference if you get the job offer or not. I know I'm not going to take it, and actually, you never know. You may even actually take the job if you get it offered. Go out there and practice, not only practicing, with videotape and maybe even with a mock interview with somebody else, but doing the real thing, making your mistakes, and so that you think about it, it will again put you at the top. It will make you stand out from others. It will make you better and put you in that top 10% of the people that are interviewing out there compared to the other 80 to 90% that are not putting in the work. And that will likely not get the job that you want. So practice, really important stuff. So, should you show a portfolio during the interview? The answer to that is absolutely not if it's not appropriate. If you're a restaurant manager, would I be showing a portfolio? Probably not. If you're an executive chef, would you be showing a portfolio of food that you've designed and made in the past? Maybe. But it depends on if they've asked for it and if it's appropriate during the interview. Now, having it there is great if you're like an executive chef. But that doesn't mean you're actually going to show it. Just have it with you. Again, it's the difference where you can say, oh, we're talking about this particular food group, or I don't know, I'm making this up, but here's some things I did for a menu. And I just happen to have some pictures. Would you like to see my portfolio real quick? Don't bore them for a half hour showing them things. Show them a couple pages, and if they want to see more, you'll be able to tell if they want to see more, or they'll even ask you, hey, do you mind if I see more of this? This is really cool. Again, it makes you stand out, and it makes you different than the other folks that are interviewing for the same position. What if they ask you an illegal question? What if they ask you a question like, are you married? And it's not appropriate to the job? That's an illegal question. What should you do? The answer is, this is how I answer it. It depends on if I want the job. Number one, I'm going to think, wow, do I really want to work for a company where they're asking me illegal questions? Probably not. But if I really do want this job, and I don't know, maybe I've been unemployed for 3 months and I really need this job and I'm kind of desperate, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to blow it off. And what I mean by that is I'm going to answer the question and say, yes, I'm married and yada, yada, and leave it alone. That's what I would do. Now, here's another thing. If you think you're going to sue them, and you might, and it might be appropriate to do so, keep in mind you're going to have to prove that this person actually asked that question, and how are you going to prove that? So those are things to think about. And then I'm certainly not trying to get anybody to sue somebody else, but think about how you're going to answer or answer illegal questions. I know I've been asked a lot of illegal questions over the years, and they weren't really a situation where they were trying to get at something, but it was they really just simply didn't realize it was an illegal question, or they messed up. Now, here's something, though, that you may not be aware of. If I bring up the fact that I'm married and they ask a question about it, then it's not necessarily illegal anymore, because you're the one who brought it up, that you are married and you're not single, that kind of thing. So there's just tons of different scenarios when it comes to that. What should you talk about? Your strengths. You want to be, again, prepared for that. Where do you need improvements? You want to be prepared for that. You want to be honest, but at the same time, you want to show that you're confident in your areas where you're going to improve. If you say that you don't have any areas that you're going to improve, you're not going to get the job. None of us are perfect, and it's a drag being human, but none of us are perfect, and you want to be sure that you have those areas to talk about. Your background and how it relates to the position you are seeking is, again, what you're going to want to be talking about, what you're going to be practicing. They're going to be listening for very specifically, what can you do for my company? Why should I hire you? What is it that makes you different from any of the other people that I'm interviewing? That's what you should be talking about, which is extremely important, obviously. What can you do for the company and not what the company can do for you? Again, we've already talked about that, but it's extremely important. You want to talk about how well you work with others. How is it that you get along with people? You want to talk about those things because guess what? In almost all of these jobs, you're going to be working with other people, and you want to prove and to show and to demonstrate that you get along with others. My recommendation is have a couple of stories in the back of your head, maybe even a note to yourself of examples of showing this HR person, this recruiter, exactly how you've worked well with others, and maybe even a difficult person, and how you changed that situation to where it turned out to be a positive instead of a negative, because that's what they're looking for. You're going to also want to talk about motivation. You want to show them that you're really motivated to work for this company and this job, and that you're really a motivated type of a person. You all know the person that's a bump on the log, and you wonder how they even function in life. Well, you don't want to come off that way, that's for sure. You want to show them that you're motivated. You want to talk about your skills. You want to think about your skills before you go in the interview. And again, I'd write those skills down. Don't memorize them. Leadership. I don't care what position you're going into. They want to hear about leadership. How, again, leadership really goes along with getting along with people. How can you influence people in the positive way? You want to think about those things before you go into the interview. Why you want to work for this organization. That's an incredibly important thing. You want, again, from your all the research that you've done, you're going to be able to easily talk about that. And again, it's going to impress that recruiter, something very important. What should you not talk about? There's quite a few things. You don't want to talk about how you hate your current or previous boss and how awful they are. Believe me, I get it. I currently have one. She's horrifying. Not here. At another, or my main position, she's a nightmare. She's a monster. You don't talk about that. And so you want to make sure that you're prepped for that as well, that you've talked to yourself about making sure I'm not going to talk about this. How you hate another company. You don't want to do that. How you hate the competition. You don't want to do that. Tell me what job the job is. You should, for the most part, know what this job is from the job description. Now, there may be certain things that you don't know about the job description, and then it's very appropriate, but indicate to them that you know what the job description is, you've done your homework, and you have a question about the job. That's very important and very appropriate. I'll do any position. Saying something like that it was one of the worst things you could possibly say. If they say, well, I really have 4 jobs available, I see you fitting into all 4 of these, well, I'll do any position. That's the thing you jump out and say. They're going to think to themselves, this person is desperate. You want to stop and think and say, you know, this job is the job that fits me the best. And here's why. Because of my skills, here's what I can bring to the company. And I think this would be the best fit. The other 3 might work, and let's talk about those things and those jobs and how I might be able to help the company. But here's what I think I would really like to do first. You want to make sure you say things like that. That's going to impress them. You don't want to talk about how you hate people. I know this may sound stupid and may sound so like anybody would know this, common sense. A lot of people don't have common sense, right? So, and when you get into these interviews, it's high pressure. All of us feel that. And so you want to make sure you've thought about what you don't want to talk about. Saying something, I know I don't have much experience, but you don't want to say that. You want to say, my experience, with this experience, I believe I can grow in this position really well because of these skills, that type of thing. You want to be careful, especially if you're young. I hear young folks talking like this all the time, well, like this. They start out every sentence. So they start out many sentences like, you don't want to do that, and you need to be you need to start prepping yourself if you're very young and you do that. Now, do I say all the time, especially when I'm recording myself? I know I do. And because I'm aware of that, I'm conscious, and I say a lot less than you'd believe, or I see, I screwed up now. And there it is, and I'll be thinking of ums now from here on in until we're done. But you want to be aware of that. And what it does for me is it forces me to talk slower, to think, and to not to throw a bunch of stuff out of my mouth. See, you want to be aware of that. Other things to not talk about, asking a question like, how much vacation time do I get? Now, if they bring up vacation, that's different, but you don't want to ask that. You want to wait until the job offer is given to you. Then it would be an appropriate time if they have not given you that information. How fast do employees get promoted? Well, they don't want to hear about you already trying to get out of that position. They want to make sure that you're in the position for a while before they promote you. Don't ask questions like that. Again, unless they bring it up, that's a different thing. No, I don't have any questions. Again, I told you that. That's one of those points that, man, you tell me that, and I'm probably not going to hire you. Don't swear. I know that sounds really common sense, like common sense as well. It's not. You want to make sure that you don't. Salary questions. That's a touchy one, but most of the time, in most situations, I would say don't bring it up. If they don't bring it up, and I'll leave it at that. Most of the time, you're going to wait until they actually offer you the job. The very last thing I want to talk about is you've gone through the interview, you've had a great time, you want the position, you feel comfortable with them. Here's what I do, is because of the world of email and how fast things happen today, in today's world, I would send an email that day and I would say, thank you so much for meeting with me. I look forward to hearing from you, yada, yada. And then I have a stack of thank you notes from a card store that simply say thank you on them or whatever, making sure it's appropriate, of course. Excuse me. And I write out basically the same thing. Thank you for meeting with me today. I really appreciate your time. I really had a great, whatever it is. I look forward to hearing from you. And don't type it. You actually want to write that information out. And then on the envelope, you want to write that information. Their name, the company address, put your return address, again, all written out, put a regular old stamp on it, and run to the post office. And that way, hopefully the next day or within a day and a half, that person's going to get a note from you through the snail mail. And very few of us do that anymore. And it makes a big difference. If that person has interviewed 10 people, you are the top 20, or one of two people of the top 20%, and both of you are pretty much equal, that may tip you over the edge to where you're going to get hired. It's because you went above and beyond. It may sound stupid, but man, does it make a difference, especially with older folks like myself that are used to snail mail years ago, where that's the only way we had a communication besides, of course, telephone. You sent a lot of formal letters. Today, that makes a big difference, and I really encourage you to do that. Well, I hope all of this information when it comes to interviewing is helpful. Certainly, I'm not able to talk about everything. I encourage you to Google or go onto YouTube or other places, other resources when it comes to interviewing. Watch videos that what not to do, what to do a lot of practicing. And no matter what industry, hospitality or wherever you're going to be going, interviewing is the same thing. basically, if you will, and you want to make sure that you practice a lot. So again, I hope some of these suggestions to you really do help you out, and best of luck in all that you do. Until we see you again, take care.